In this session, we're going to be looking at answering an essay question. So the question that we're going to be looking at today is, to what extent are the BRICs challenging the United States' position of superpower, of the hegemon? So what we're going to do is I'm just going to talk you through how we might organise that. I'm not going to go over a lot of the details with this. You need to put the facts and figures in, but I'm going to go over some of the factors that you might want to consider. And I've given each one ticks that you're going to be able to explain the significance of each of these. So the question says, to what extent? So that means, how are these other countries, the BRIC countries, Brazil, Russia, India and China, how are they challenging the United States in terms of the United States' position as the only true hegemon? So we're going to look at the pros and cons really of each of those countries, and then we're going to come to a conclusion, which I've written at the bottom. Overall, we're going to say, what is your opinion? There's no right or wrong here really. To what extent are these countries challenging the United States' position? We might decide that they're not really challenging at the present time, but they might be in the future. So let's look, first of all, our introductory paragraph should always talk about the definitions of the key terms. So here we've got BRICs. We need to lay out what BRICs means, and we need to lay out what the term superpower means. So that is the idea that it's a country that has influence on other countries around the world. So the first little paragraph is going to be your definitions. Then we're going to get straight into the essay, and we're going to look at why the US is the hegemon. I've put here the factors for the United States. They're the same factors that we're going to discuss here, but we know that nearly all of these factors are very positive factors for the United States. So they get tick, 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 tick all along, because that's why the United States is the hegemon. However, we might want to discuss how some of these factors might be challenged by some of the other countries, what we're looking at in a second. So I've put these in no particular order. I've just written out the letters BRICs. So we're just going to start with Brazil. What we need to look at are these factors, which we know, the factors that lead the country to become the superpower. That is land area, population, natural resources, the location of the country in terms of how easy it is for it to trade. GG is global grouping, so how and what are they involved in? Are they involved in the World Bank? Are they involved in the IMF, in the G20 and the G8? Because that means power and influence and the ability to help with decision making. Military powers, often that hard power, is also very important. So we're going to hopefully be given some facts and figures about the military, amount of money that is spent on military, or where that military force is dispersed around the world. Culture, soft power is obviously really important. So we're going to look at how Brazil's soft power maybe is strong or not strong. And the economy, of course, the economy. The economic position is very, very important in maintaining that superpower status. So I've given this ticks, just a couple of ticks for the Brazil, because as you will know, of having studied Brazil as a case study of one of the BRICs, you'll know what these facts and figures are. So as we can see here, Brazil has got one tick for most things. So it's looking like it's not really going to challenge the United States in terms of superpower status in the current climate or for the foreseeable future. And you're going to use some facts and figures to state that. We're then going to look at Russia, which obviously was involved in superpower status during the Cold War. So we might want to talk about that a little bit. However, in terms of what Russia has now, we can say that it does have, I've given it 2 ticks for land area, I've given it 1 tick for population, I've given it quite a few ticks for natural resources. Its location is a bit landlocked if you take the fact that the northern part of Russia is completely ice and the eastern part of Russia is quite a lot of ice there as well, and not very easy communication links, etc., not very good road links. Global groupings, we need to consider that it is a part of global groupings, but it has been kicked out of the G8 because of its incursion into Ukraine, etc., so we might want to mention that. Obviously, Russia has got a very strong military might, so that's got 3 ticks. Its economy isn't too great at the moment because what we talked about after the Cold War, how it's struggling really to get TNC investment. And its culture, not an awful lot of influence around the world with its culture. Its language is limited in terms of what it can, what influence it can have with that. Then we're going to consider China. And China will, hopefully you will consider that China will be a threat in the future and is a threat in certain times. So definitely, land area's got several ticks. Its population is very huge. We know that that's a really positive factor for China because it's got a huge population in terms of being able to to have huge labour force, and an educated labour force. As we know, there's about 300,000 Chinese people who are educated to a very high level with lots and lots of skills to be able to access that high level job market, those high level skills, those elite kind of jobs. Lots of natural resources in terms of coal there, its location in terms of its markets and its trading within Asia itself. And we know that it's got some influence in Eastern Africa, and we know what those links are. It's a member of many of the global groupings these days, the G20, etc. Its economy is booming, absolutely booming. Maybe not in terms of GDP per capita, remember, because it has 1.3 billion people, but definitely in terms of its growth, which we know is around about 10%. It's dropped a little bit in the last couple of years, but we know it's surpassing the United States economy growth and European economic growth 2-3 times. Culture is, I put a tick and a question mark. Now, from a cultural point of view, China has 1.3 billion people, so we can't say that it doesn't have a cultural influence around the world when it's influencing 1.3 billion people. However, outside of China, that language issue is a problem. Its military might is growing with its military on the sea and its incursions into Eastern Africa. As we know, it's in East Africa, so that gets a couple of ticks. So this may well be the area that you're looking at that's given the United States the biggest threat to the United States hegemon. India. Again, we need to look at India in terms of being a possible threat in the future, but maybe not now, because India's got a lot of internal problems. So its land area is big. I should give that 2 ticks, really. Its population is very large, again, 1.1 billion, not quite as large as China, but we know that, again, about 300 million of those people are quite educated. They live in the cities. We know we have outsourcing with a lot of TNCs located there. They have the equivalent of Silicon Valley in terms of technological advancements. So we know that is, and its economy is growing rapidly as well. Natural resources, it has a lot of natural resources. It also has lots of issues with its natural resources, especially in terms of its water supply. Its location, again, is a good location in terms of being close to that growing Asian market. We know that it's well positioned there. It's also well positioned towards Africa to the west and China and other Asian countries to the east. Again, members of global groupings in terms of the G20. Its economy is booming, but we know that, again, GDP per capita maybe sets it back quite a lot and is probably quite a lot behind China at the present time, although its economy is growing. From a cultural point of view, I've given it a tick in terms of Bollywood. Okay, you do have, it's got quite a lot of positive influence, Indian culture around the world that is growing, so that's something that we might consider. And military, it does have some military power. However, it does have issues on its borders to the west with Kashmir, so lots of its military money is being put into securing those borders with Kashmir and disputed territories between it and Pakistan, which we'll do in a subsequent podcast later on. So once we have considered these 4 countries in terms of their factors and which factors are positive or negative, we need to go back to the overall question, which is to what extent are these BRICs challenging the US's position of superpower? And you're going to put your own conclusions here, and I would assume that you're going to say that perhaps these, especially Brazil, not really a superpower. Russia, we do have to keep an eye on because it does have a lot of natural resources and it does have a lot of military power, and it is a threat to a certain extent. China is definitely a threat in terms of economic power, maybe not so much soft power in terms of cultural power, but definitely economic power and a growing military power, which still seems to be important. We can also, maybe in subsequent lessons, you can tie this in, the fact that China has also got, it's dropping a lot of rocks in the South China Sea and claiming a lot of territory there to take the resources out of that area. But we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a couple of subsequent lessons. And India, again, could be a threat in the future, but probably not now. So I would suggest that overall, these are, to a certain extent, a threat to the US, but in the foreseeable future, the next couple of decades perhaps, you could argue that none of them are a really big threat to the hegemon of the United States at the present time.